Okay, let's go.
I'm Nicole Lee, and welcome back to You Never Know, where we talk about life, career, change, and the stories of people who have taken the unconventional road and embraced the unknowns. If you liked my content and podcast so far, remember to like, comment, or subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to this to help me create more relevant content for you in the future. Today's guest is someone who grew up as an immigrant kid in the US and knows exactly how it feels like to not quite fit in and to try to belong. From life in the corporate world at Dell and Accenture to starting businesses from scratch, he's someone who has learned the hard way about some of the darker lessons of entrepreneurship and that life is never linear. Today, as Chief Sales Officer in Asia Pacific at Sinch, he's passionate not just about growing business in the cloud communication space, he's also a strong advocate for opening up conversations around mental health for men and leading with vulnerability. I'm super excited to be having this conversation today. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Neil Patwardhan to You Never Know. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really cool to have you here.
This is a great setup.
I'm
looking forward to all the questions.
Feeling comfortable?
Always.
I think it all started when you kind of commented on my LinkedIn post.
Yep.
Can't remember what exactly you commented on, but we met shortly after that.
We did.
And then here we are in the podcast.
And it was an instant connection, right? A lunch turned into quick, conversations around everything. I feel like we must have talked at least about 20 different topics.
Exactly. And I think what stood out for me when we met and we had that conversation was I felt you were deeply inspired to talk about things that mattered to you, especially about mental health for men and sort of bringing people together to have more meaningful conversations, which really resonated with me. And, when these things happen, there's always a deeper story behind it. And I think we're going to go there today. So I'm going to dive right in and ask
Let's go.
Neil, you moved to the US when you were 10 years old. Why did you and your family move? Where do you move from and what was it like for you?
Yeah, so actually, it's a very, very interesting story. So I was born in a town in India called Pune.
Okay.
And grew up before we immigrated. My parents were both worked in the corporate segment. They were high performing, got burnt out. My mother was 40, my age actually right now. My dad 41 at the time, got burnt out. And then decided, both of them at the same time, that they're going to get up and quit and jump into getting their PhDs so they can become professors.
Okay.
They both did it at the same time. So I would advise to whoever wants to do their PhDs with their spouse, don't do it at the same time because it's a drastic change. But they both decided to do it at the same time. And part of that remit was to move to the university in the US, which was in a town called Carbondale, Illinois. So it's in the south of Illinois, Southern Illinois, to start their PhD process. And then they had 2 kids in tow, me and my younger brother, right? So it was very, very interesting growing up in a family environment where you have your cousins, you have your friends, that's all you knew. Life was very comfortable, and both financially and otherwise, to moving to a completely new country in your 90s where new culture, small town mentality, right? There were 5 Indian kids in the schools that I went to. 4 of them grew up in the US. So I was absolutely the fresh off the boat, FOB. And it caused a lot of challenges for me. And I can speak about it more openly now in my 30s because at 30s and 40s because I can start to articulate what I went through. But that adjustment was extremely hard for me, much easier for my younger brother because he was young.
Yeah.
So he could kind of grow up in the system. But I think one of the key things that kind of stood out was at that time, my parents were so busy. They were taking their classes and their courses, then working at night, that I didn't really have the opportunity to tell them what I was going through. So for a long time, I was alone.
Yeah.
Alone in school, and in terms of having friends and everything else, alone when I got back to our apartment, and just starting to figure out, how to sort of, be normal with it, right? And that took that took a pretty big toll on me. And so by the time I graduated high school in that same town, I was ready to leave. And I was ready to leave as far away as I could from that town. Until this day, I've not been back. And that's when I moved to Texas to do my uni, and then ended up getting my first job. And I've been in Texas ever since, before I moved to Singapore 3 years ago.
You said that you moved towns. So how much of the challenges that you faced was because of the town and the environment versus what you went through as a family?
Yeah, so I think with the town, right, you have to understand, small town US, right, all those kids grew up there. They already had their friendship circles, their parents knew each other, the cliques were already formed, right? I never experienced any bullying or anything of that sort. It was exactly the opposite. I was completely ignored. Right. And so I think...
well, that's a form of bullying too.
Yeah, maybe so, right? I mean, and again, not faulting anyone, but I think it's just one of those things where, they were all very nice to say hi and speak to when spoken to, but the valuable lesson you learn here is you cannot wait around to make friends. You cannot wait around for people to come up to you. You have to go seize the moment. You have to go 90% for someone to come 10. And so a lot of my current functionality and how I think about, and we'll talk about networking and other things in the future, all started because of that. Because I had to go make friends, introduce myself, get myself into groups, try new things, figure out if there's a fit, if I wanted to, get out of my own sort of space. So a lot of it was driven by my need to fit in.
Yeah.
Whereas at home, we were just trying to get by. And that was also a very tough time because you go from earning a decent amount of money as you're in corporate back in the US, in India, and then you move on student salaries, which pay you nothing.
Yeah.
So when you talk about living life at a poverty level and starting to figure out what that looks like in the US, there was all this added pressure. And my parents did admirably, trying to just keep us afloat.
Yeah.
But as a young kid growing up, I didn't understand that, right? Because I was used to certain creature comforts back home. Yeah. And now I felt those were all taken away from me.
Yeah. So your home environment was challenging.
Very.
The school environment was challenging as well. So in terms of culture and language as well, I'm pretty sure that was pretty hard for you. What do you have to do to actually fit in?
Language took some time. To me at that point, English was my second language, right? But gradually became my first because you adopt that mentality, right? You start to go through and start to think through as an American or growing up as an American kid. Culture was actually easier. It was easier because it was a blank slate for me, right? Coming from India where there's so much culture, right? There's so many different things. You move to the US, you realize the US has been, it's been an amalgamation of different cultures, right? So it doesn't really have its own culture per se, but it's a mix of so many interesting and fascinating cultures. So there was an Indian community in the town that we moved to. So we started to acclimatize with them and started to keep interacting and going to some of those functions and kind of keeping at least a little bit of lifeline back to our own Indian customs. But gradually, and this is the interesting part, I started to notice myself move away from that and spend more time in American customs, in Friday night football games, right? Saturday road rallies and things like that, where I started to, because I wanted so much to fit in.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't want what I had back where I was. I wanted to embrace and move forward. And I think to this day, I would say our family is extremely liberal for being Indian.
Yeah.
We're not conservative at all and have never been. And I think a lot of that has been because of where we grew up in the US.
Right. I was just about to say, because in some cases, your family would be like, hey, no, Neil, why are you so American? You should be more Indian, right? But they weren't like that.
No, never, not once. And so my brother and I were given the freedom to do what we wanted, experience what we wanted, right? We obviously made our mistakes and learned from them, but there was never any kind of inclination or any kind of pressure from both my parents to say, you need to be doing this, you need to be doing that.
Right.
So that I would say was probably one of the big boosts in terms of how we grew up,
Yeah.
and the courage to experiment and to introduce risk and try new things, and then forge our careers. Where now my brother and I have two very, very different careers, right? I'm more on the corporate side and having grown up in startups and corporate, and he's a pastry chef.
Oh, cool.
Completely different, right?
Right.
And that's his love for that. So, yeah. So again, there were never any restrictions on us.
I see a lot of benefits actually of you growing up in that state, and given what you've learned. But let's talk about the darker sides of it as well. I mean, you mentioned that you had to you yearned to fit in, and that's why you started to network from a very young age. How else did that affect you in a more challenging way?
Yeah, so I think back in the 90s, I don't think depression was really diagnosed per se, especially that early. I'm pretty sure I went through a pretty intense dose of it, even getting into high school, right? And it's just because again, if you don't have a level of support that understands what you're going through, let alone parents who are not there because they're busy trying to build, their restart their careers, right, into being professors, it becomes hard, right? And so the intense feelings of loneliness, the fact that every day you wake up with a big sort of weight on your shoulders, on your head, you can't seem to figure a way out, and then you go through the routine because there's nothing exciting, right? You're going to school, you're kind of going through the schedule of school, then you're coming back, and then you're spending time with yourself, and then you're getting ready for dinner, and then you spend some time with family, and then you go to bed. And it's kind of pretty much the same thing. Towards the end of when I started to move up in high school, I made friends. I went and started to engage with people. And it's where I started to really hone in on how people perceive me, and I would change for them depending on the audience. So I started to become a chameleon, right? So if I was interacting with a set of friends that were part of the track team, I would be quite different than if I was interacting with a set of friends who were in math class, right, or doing something else. And I didn't realize I was doing it. But I started, when I started to think back now, it was just automatic, right? All because I wanted to be like them.
Yeah.
Right. And so
did it work though?
Maybe I think with mixed success. I suddenly didn't feel alone anymore, which was good. Have I made lifelong friends from high school because of it? No. Right. So I think that really then wired me when I decided to go to college. And even college for me was not a decision I could make because we weren't, we didn't have money. So we had to go where my parents could get a job.
Right.
And that's how we ended up in Texas. Right. So my mother got a job at a university in Texas teaching. And so part of that remit, I could get affordable tuition to go to school. And that was the only way I was going to go to college. So when I didn't have the choice in that either, you kind of just go along for the ride and say, okay, I'll make the best out of my opportunity. But I will safely say that going to uni in the US was basically a rebirth for me. I left everything behind in terms of all the pain, the pressure, all the bad habits in high school. I wasn't a straight A student. I was probably a C, maybe a B student. And then coming to uni and just reinventing myself, right? Because I never wanted to feel like that again. And then when you come to an American uni, at least the one I went to, there's, 10 to 20,000 new undergrads that are coming in with you.
Right.
So everybody's the same start line. Everybody wants to make friends. Everyone wants to figure it out. So to me, it was a chance for a rebirth.
I wanted to dive deeper into that lesson that you learned in terms of what you said about you having to go 90% so that, it's not waiting for someone to come to you. How did that help you when you went to university and also in your career? Yeah, I mean, very simple. If you saw a group of people, that you wanted to approach, you go approach, right? There doesn't have to be an agenda. Or sometimes it's as simple as saying hi.
right? And then figuring out how the conversation grows from there. But at the same time, you have to be ready to understand that it may not go anywhere. You may actually get rejected.
Yeah.
They may not include you, right?
Yeah.
Or the conversation may be very short. But you have to be okay with that. So to me, once I normalize in my head that it's a 50-50 chance that I'm going to have an engaging conversation or I'm not, right? And then that's what it is. So that gradually gave me more confidence, right? And I think confidence is the key. I think people overthink networking, to be perfectly honest.
Yes,
it's just
of
like,
course.
and then it becomes paralysis by analysis,
Yeah.
right? Versus just go, just say hi, right?
Yeah.
There doesn't need to be an agenda. And 9 times out of 10, now that looking back in my career, 9 times out of 10, most people just want to be approached and said hi. And then it can sort of flow from there.
I think that's very interesting because, first of all, I think it's very fascinating how your pain and your challenges in your childhood actually helps to shape you to who you are today. And yeah, in terms of networking, a lot of people are afraid of networking. And I think like this skill of sort of approaching people really served you very well.
Yeah, and we have to understand why people are afraid. If you're at a networking, if you're at a conference or a networking event, right? The very purpose of that is to meet people.
Yeah.
But when you go with a friend, for example, 9 times out of 10, you'll just end up speaking with a friend.
Yes.
And just kind of hanging in the corner, right?
Yes.
But what is stopping you? What are you afraid of? And what most people are afraid of is a fear of rejection. Oh, I don't know what to talk about.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, well, why don't you talk about why you're there together? Right? Because this is the topic. This is the conversation, right? So I think it's just a matter of reframing in your mind why you're there and what you want to get out of it.
Yeah.
And maybe set some tangible goals. Hey, I want to talk to 10 people at this event. And maybe out of that, 3 will continue speaking to me. Okay. That's 3 friends you didn't have before. Right? So what's the positive out of this, right? Versus just going to the event and kind of being in your corner and then waiting for other people to approach you, which will also never happen.
Yeah, no, I think this is actually very useful for many people because it's like, it's not what you want to get out of it, but it's more about being present in that moment. And if you're already there, making the best out of the situation, right? Is that also how it led you to sales roles in your career?
You could say that. I think I discovered later that this could really turbocharge my sales career. I was never interested in sales.
Yeah.
It was my first job out of college and I hated it. And then I jumped into marketing and did a whole bunch of different roles in marketing and strategy and among other things. But when you realize that no matter what industry you're in, what role you're in, you're constantly selling yourself.
Yes.
Internally, to your peers, right? To externally to your customers. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to be labeled sales.
Agree.
Right? And so when you understand that, then it becomes much more comfortable. Say every day I'm presenting myself in a different light to someone to drive something. Right?
Yeah.
That is sales.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think once I sort of figured that out and became very comfortable with it, I started to gravitate towards more sort of sales roles where I can do this in earnest. And then that eventually led me into a career where it was all about engagement with customers first and then working my way backwards into the types of roles I wanted.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very refreshing way of looking at sales, right? Because every single day we are presenting ourselves in different ways, in different situations, in different contexts, right? So I think that's a really cool way of looking at sales. So take me through where you started in your career, because it then also led you to set up 2 businesses. So I'm just wondering where did that come from?
Yeah. So my first job was at Dell out of college. I was there for almost 10 years, a variety of roles. I started in sales, so I was in consumer sales, so in a kind of a contact center in the US. Those were this was back in the early 2000s where Dell was a rocket ship, right? It was taking off. The business was global, massive growth. But again, when you talk to individual consumers who want to buy laptops, and you're the front lines, you learn so much. And by far, and I will go on record to say this, Dell is by far the most analytically driven company I've ever worked for.
Wow.
And even today, right? Just the level of rigor. So as I moved from sales to marketing to product management to strategy, every single role was backed by data, right?
Wow.
And you figured out the skill of how do you tell stories with data, right? Because you have a lot of data, but how do you actually bring that together to tell something cohesive that then allows to make a decision? That is a skill that needed to be learned.
Give us one tip.
Start with the problem statement, and then secondarily start with the audience. What a lot of people forget is, okay, if the problem statement is X, I'm going to start to build a plan. Sure. But who are you presenting the plan to, and why would they care? So there was an acronym that we used at Dell. It was called WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Okay, cool.
So every time we built a presentation for an exec or a customer or whatever it may be that we're presenting, we started to do a personality analysis on that person to understand why they would care what we're about to present to them. So that refined our presentation, refined the type of data we wanted to show and the story we wanted to tell. And if you don't land that within the first 5 minutes of presenting, you've already lost your audience. So that skill is what I learned over 10 years at Dell, because when you land them, then they're much more likely to give you a thumbs up, go do it, I approve, or hey, I'm buying, let's go. And then your cycles to get stuff done become shorter.
That's really useful. What's in it for me with him? Because it applies to both internal stakeholders as well as customers who want to buy your product.
Yep.
And I think that's very useful because, because it's not, I think it's not enough just to have a good product, right? It's about the story that you tell and how it appears to that person and whether that person benefits from it as well.
Yeah, and it's bringing in human psychology, right? And that's the side that I got super, super interested in because of my experiences in the past, right? On, hey, no matter what position you might be in or what role you might play or what company you might work for, there is a human across from you, right? They care about something. Find out what they care about so that you can tailor the story to them. And then if they need to get approvals from their higher ups, you want to make them your best friend so they feel like it's their idea, right? So I was so happy when Inception came out because because in some ways
now I gotta be careful when I talk to
you because it's the art of seeding an idea and actually helping it grow so that they come off as the champion, right? And you get what you need.
Got to be extra careful talking to Neil right now.
Again,
he planted so many seeds.
but I think that's the nuances of selling, right? It's actually when you talk about sales, it's actually not about the sale. It's about building relationships and trust.
Yeah.
Sales are essentially things that happen. Or basically events that happen in time, right? You can have multiple sales, but you need to have a strong relationship.
I'm curious.
Yep.
Where do you then draw the line between incepting and putting the idea in someone else versus creating a more authentic relationship?
Well, I don't think it's any different. I think you can't inspire people to think differently unless you have trust and build a relationship, right?
Okay.
So I think building relationship and credibility is important. That's kind of step one, right? And step two is, and oftentimes it's answering the mail, which is here's what's keeping them up at night. Right? This is what's in it for you. This is how I will do it. And so address the pain points up front so that it further builds the credibility. Step three is then, by the way, now that we've addressed the near-term issues, I've got a few ideas I want to plant by you, right? And this is where we could really take this a notch above, right? They're far more likely to listen and take that and start to nurture that when you've done some base level trust work with them already.
Yeah, I think it's a smart approach to understanding your client or your business to then be able to, deliver and present ideas that are relevant for them rather than put something in front of them that they don't want. So I think that's actually really useful. I didn't expect you to say those things, but I think that's really useful.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's just after, and going back to the original question, right? As I moved through my career at Dell, great company, learned a ton, obviously. But I felt I was I'd stalled after a while. Yeah. I'd learned as much as I could. I was also young, so That was also the first time where I noticed I couldn't get up to the next level.
Yeah.
Right. Just because of my age and a couple of different factors at a time.
Right.
So I left without a plan, and just wanted to see what was out there. And I describe myself as the accidental founder. I never really wanted to start startups.
Okay.
Tell
me
but
more.
I also don't sit still. So when I was looking for other jobs, I had all this time.
Yeah.
And then I found an issue I wanted to solve. Then I've tried to, I wanted to figure out if I could solve it. And so that actually gave birth to the first startup where we built basically private social networks for daycares and preschools. So the apps that if any of you have kids out there and you use a school app, we built that first concept in the US in 2013. Right. And it came out of a need. And that was, at that time, the only way the school could communicate with the parents was email chains.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I couldn't keep up, right? It was just, especially if you have 100 parents on an email chain, it's just impossible, right? So I asked them to maybe create a Facebook group. They're like, no, sensitivity, kids stuff, we don't want it on that, right? Okay. So then what would work? I'm like, okay, well, why don't I build an app for you guys? And we'll encrypt it, it'll be authenticated, only the parents can get in and school can get in. Very simple news feed, anybody can post, but it's only for the school.
Yeah.
And what started as a test then quickly evolved into other features. We raised around 175 schools later, in over 2 years, the app had grown rapidly, and we had sort of figured out the way of how to build these what we call micro communities for schools that were high engagement between the school and the parents, and it solved a need, and the need was really that communication back and forth without having to go to email.
Okay.
And it's funny because by the time we exited, right around that time, Slack was born.
Oh, okay, cool.
And so now that I think back, maybe I should have held on and continued to grow it. But and Slack is what it is today, and now it's a behemoth, right, for communication channels.
I wanted to hit pause because you made that journey sound so easy. You're like, from one thing to another, one thing led to another, but I'm pretty sure that it wasn't easy at all.
It was very, very hard. Nothing in corporate life ever prepares you to become a first-time founder.
Yeah.
Ever. It's your baby, so you work 23 hours a day. You're constantly connected. There's no way for you to turn off. The stress of you have to wear multiple hats, right? So if you're starting a company, what does it look like? If you're going to hire someone, how do you pay them? What's your revenue model? If you're going to raise money, what does that look like? Especially while raising, I absolutely had to re-hone my skills for presenting our pitch deck, right? I had 99 versions of it, each version for a different investor. And I had 99 rejections, right? Before I got my first check.
Right.
So you have to develop thick skin, right? It's not personal, even though it may feel like it is.
Yeah.
When you start to wear all of this, it becomes a very, very stressful environment and something that it can never prepare you for.
Yeah.
I think also at this time, right, my wife didn't work.
Yeah.
And I had a 2-year-old kid.
Yeah.
Right. So in the US, you need to have insurance. You need to at least survive on livelihood. I wasn't paying myself anything. We're surviving on our savings because I was passionate about this project. All that adds to, well, shit, I need to still provide for my family while chase my passion. So failure is not an option for me. I have to make it work.
So that put a lot of weight
100%
on you.
Right. And it was every day. And you can notice it in my past pictures. I looked, very, very thin. I lost weight. I wasn't sleeping well. My diet was off. Didn't have time to work out. There was always 1,001 issues to solve for. It's not a life that, honestly, I thought I would do or be prepared to do. So when we did exit, and I went back to corporate for that reason to recover. Right. Which is really interesting because I needed to recover. I needed a steady state job. I needed insurance. I needed to just sort of come back to normal, or my normal, right? For a few years, and not pursue another startup after that. Which a lot of there's a lot of serial entrepreneurs, and that's their lifestyle. But I paid a very high price for mine. And that was my health, and I need to get back on track.
Yeah, I think, I was never a sort of a startup founder in that way, but I have worked in a startup. And I think, like you said, nothing prepares you for what startup life is like. And I think people, including myself, completely underestimate it.
Yep.
I'm just curious, like, do you think that taking investor money actually adds so much more pressure, or could you actually do without it?
If you're generating revenue, yes. I think it's a chicken and egg, right?
Yeah.
In order for you to get to revenue, you might need investment to scale and to get there. Or if you could do it without investment, I will highly advise it. I'm not a fan of big rounds.
Yeah.
It's simply not my mantra, right? Now it also depends on which investors you want to have on your cap table. It's not just about the check.
Yes.
It's their support, it's their connections, it's their expertise. All of this was new to me for the first time around. Right. How do you evaluate the right people on your cap table? We had some pretty bad apples on our cap table. Yeah. It was because I needed the money and I took it in, and it turned out to be a disastrous decision, right?
Yeah.
So you'll learn all this stuff as you go along, because there wasn't an MBA course on startups at the time.
No.
Right? You just kind of go on the fly, and you experiment, you fail, you figure it out. But all that pressure sits on you, the founder, not your working team.
Yeah, no, actually, this part is actually really important. I think what people don't see, because taking money is not just taking money. It actually comes with a cost. And that cost can be control, can be influence,
100%.
can be undue, complications in terms of decision making as well. So,
and you hear so many stories where after you've taken money, right, it ends up coming back where the founder is replaced, the CEO is replaced.
Yeah.
And that's... It's a brutal life, but it happens all the time. So can you be 100% certain on what kind of money you want to take in? No.
Yeah.
But you kind of have to then, one, you need to start with a good board of advisors that can actually help you sort of vet and direct before you start to take in your first check and seeing what that would look like. And then ultimately, the point is to get to generating some sort of revenue as soon as possible, because you want to be self-sustaining.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the right way of kind of growing a business.
If there was one or two things you could do differently if you were to do it all over again, what would they be?
I wouldn't start a startup with a family and one income. It's too much pressure. It's too much pressure. It's, in my personal opinion, the cost is quite high. Quite high. And it did have ramifications down the line as well, right?
Yeah.
I think that's number one. Number two is I would do product market fit much earlier. So what I mean by that is don't spend so much time building a perfect product, right? Which is when you're so close to it, it's your baby. That's all you care about. You should be testing it out in the market constantly and iterating and getting feedback and taking a step back from your product, right? Because if there's feedback that's coming in that your product's not resonating or it's not working, and here are a few reasons why, don't take it personally. It's you're trying to solve a market need versus trying to build a product to build a market. Completely different things, right? I've seen it both ways, where people come up with amazing products that go nowhere because there isn't a market need for it. So you need to find a market need that you want to solve for, and then build a product against it and continue to iterate over and over again. And stay, and don't be, and it's not personal. I think that's the big one, where it's not personal. You're trying to build a business to address a need. So those are the two things that I would do differently now.
When you said it's not personal, did you mean that for you as a founder, you might have been trying to hold on to a baby that needs to be perfect?
Yeah. And I think it's also the criticism, or the constructive criticism that comes your way around the product, right? You may think your product is the greatest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah.
Right. And it just works. You're absolutely certain of it.
Yeah.
And then when you go out and you test it and you're not getting uptick, or investors not biting because they don't understand the value proposition or whatever it is, you tend to think they take things personally. Like, how do they not get it?
Right.
I see it so clearly. Right. But that's because you're very close to the product.
Yeah.
right? Versus, is this what the market needs?
Yeah.
Right? Is this what the market's asking for? Does it solve a pain point? And then would people be willing to pay for it?
Yes.
Those are the questions that you should be asking, and then working your way back into, well, what is my product today? Does it address those? Or does it need to evolve? So the common joke, at least in the US startup circles, is pivot.
Yeah.
Pivot.
Yeah, keep pivoting until you get it, right?
Correct.
Where do you draw the line? Because I mean, like for many people thinking about doing their own startups or like doing their own business right now, where do they draw the line between being optimistic and not giving up too soon?
That's tough. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer for this. I think it largely depends on each individual and how much they're willing to endure to either give it their all and make it work. Or if it's not working, being bold enough to pull the plug and say, it's not working. And so I've started 3 companies. I've exited 2 and spectacularly bombed out of a 3rd and laid off people, ran out of funding. And that is one of the hardest decisions you will ever have to make as a founder, that it's not working. I gave years of my life to this. I gave it my all. People's livelihood depends on you. And now you're going to have to let them go one by one. And you're going to have to shut down everything. You're going to have to let the investors know that you've lost money.
Yeah.
And you start that process of winding down. And it is an incredibly humbling experience. And so that also has a huge impact on your mental health.
Yeah.
It has a huge impact on men who've experienced that, because we typically don't talk about it and we kind of internalize it, even with our partners, because a majority of the time we feel that we're on this island where nobody understands us.
Yeah.
Unless we're connected to another founder who's been through it.
Right.
So we don't think our wives will get it or our partners will get it.
Yeah.
Even though they're there to support us, but there's no way, there's a barrier. We just cannot accept it. That further isolates you. And that's why you get into, when you hear in the startup circles, you're, manic depressive, you're suicidal, substance abuse, right? Alcoholism, a whole bunch of things they all become coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the dark side of entrepreneurship. That's the dark side of choosing a life like this, where if you don't have the support circle set up ahead of time, and if you're a first-time founder, you won't. Is the flat answer. You may end up going on the slippery slope, which is quite tough.
Which is why it's important to have conversations like these, because 100%. I think even if at that time you may not have had that support circle, but whoever is starting it now sort of needs to hear it, that you need to have that kind of support as well. I guess that's probably why this topic is so close to your heart.
Yeah, it is. And it's also, at least growing up in the US and in Austin, which is a huge, when I moved to Austin and started my startups there, it's a huge startup mecca ecosystem. People do tend to talk about these openly, right? And they've always done so when I was there. And there were a lot of support circles that was stood up. I was in a founder circle that we met, every month at someone's house, different startup founders from different backgrounds and verticals. And we talked about shit that mattered, right? Deep stuff, which is, hey, I'm going through this. Are you going through this? Like, how do we kind of figure this out, right? But even if we didn't exit out with answers, there was comfort in knowing that we were all going through it in numbers, right? And that's support. When I moved to Asia, I wasn't, obviously I wasn't, I moved because of Accenture and I was here and I started getting engaged in the startup circles here just to see what's out here, right? And it astounded me how many conversations I've had, stories I've listened to, people I've met that are incredibly isolated.
100%.
Right? Yeah. And then you start to ask the question, why? Why doesn't Singapore have a setup like this? Why doesn't Asia embrace a setup like this? Is failure considered a big taboo or stigma because of the cultures we grew up in?
Yeah.
Versus being openly talked about so we could support each other. Failure is iterative. You have to fail to get better. You have to fail to exponentially grow. So it's part of process. So having it viewed as negative is actually, it's actually not correct.
Yeah.
Right? So when you embrace that, you're far more likely to move faster, iterate faster. From your failure, you learn quickly what to do better and move forward. That's how innovation happens.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the spot.
Yeah.
It is exactly that. Is that in Singapore and in parts of Asia, failure doesn't seem to be an option. And including myself, how I grew up, it's like making mistakes, scoring less than 90% on your tests. I know all these things add up in terms of like you cannot fail, you cannot make mistakes. If you take the wrong path, if you made the wrong choice, then there are consequences. So I think you absolutely hit the nail on the spot, which is why, we don't talk about these things as well. So in terms of you moving from the US to Asia, that was quite a big realization for you.
Yes and no. So I think I when the opportunity came up to move here, I think I was ready. I wanted a fresh challenge. So you think about my career, right? We talked about anything but linear. It is certainly not linear. But the one thing that has always stood out for me, which is sort of my core tenet on how I take roles and how I move up in my career, is based on one fact, and that is risk. Because of the way I've grown up, I'm extremely comfortable with it. I thrive in ambiguity. More gray space, the better, because I'm a creator. I like to create things. I like to build things. I like to scale things. I like to stabilize things, and I like to hand them off to the operators. And then you operate, and I move on to the next problem that I need to go solve. That is exciting to me, right? So an opportunity to move to Asia, move to Singapore, coming out of COVID, where so much has changed. The way of doing business has changed. The nuances of culture, how you do business in Singapore is very different than Malaysia, very different than Indonesia, very different than Japan, very different than China. Like, that's exciting to me. It was the right opportunity to come, and obviously I'm eternally thankful for Accenture to giving me that. And then giving me the ability to work in multiple countries, multiple cultures, and really understanding those nuances, and I haven't looked back since.
Yeah. I have a question on mental health.
Yep.
Because it's such a big part of you, and actually for me as well, I resonate a lot with it, because to be honest, I don't think it's just men who don't talk about it. Actually, a lot of women don't talk about it as well. I think it depends on how you grew up in the society that you live in. But particularly for men, you don't really have talked to your friends about it as well. Why do you think that is so?
Shame. I don't think anybody wants to be labeled as weak, depending on how you were brought up. I think one is just your own personal feelings. I think two is people don't know where to start. How do you start? You don't just get together for a set of beers and say, I'm suffering.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you guys about something, right? It's not easy, right? So, I think it's extremely important. For me, therapy was always a key outlet. I started in the US, I do it here. It's important. It's important to rationalize those conversations, because what I also learned is when you keep things inside, festering for too long, eventually it's going to be a house of cards and it's going to topple.
Yeah.
You're going to have a massive breakdown. And I've been through a couple of those. So how do you make sure that when you're going through something, you have the ability to talk and you have the ability to talk about it with someone who can understand it? And in this case, it could be a licensed therapist, or it could be a really close friend, or it could be a family member, or whatever it is. Find your circle of safety that you could start to communicate with. And I think that's the first sort of understanding, right? The first step is acceptance. I am going through something.
Very important.
It's okay to be not okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And COVID had long-lasting sort of effects on all of us globally, right? Because we were used to a certain way of life, and all of a sudden it was interrupted. So for parents, for example, right? I mean, and you can resonate with this as well. All of a sudden it was hard to have your kids at home, not going to school,
so hard,
trying to figure out how to still get them, to. I remember my daughter was, we were trying to get her on Zoom classes, and she's like, "What is this? You can't expect a kid to sit in front of a computer for 6 hours. Impossible."
Yeah.
right? So all these things added to the stress. You were not seeing your friends. You weren't seeing, you had all these traveling.
Yeah.
You could barely visit your family.
Yeah.
Right. So that isolation, obviously adds to all of this and adds to the mental stress that we as a people have felt for a long time.
Yeah.
And now it's just been taken up a notch, right?
Yeah.
So when you come to a point now where years later, you haven't worked through those, that base level of stress is now just compounding daily, depending on what additional stress you might be going through.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to find your outlet and get it out. And I think going the therapy route is one. Finding groups where you're doing activities that matter to you, run clubs and this and that.
Yeah.
I think you start to kind of build that setup for you.
Yeah.
But you've got to be bold enough to let go. And what I mean by that is it's having these open conversations, right?
Right, as in let go in terms of letting it off your chest, getting things off your chest, and to be vulnerable enough to say the things that are impacting you, right?
Yeah, and look, I mean, do it in the safety of whatever circle you want to build, right? I can also understand that, particularly in Asia, right, is there's an impression of what people will think of me if I become vulnerable.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
My social status, so it's always sort of top of mind for most people. You could choose two ways. One, you can sort of, you don't have to be so bold to kind of put your shit out there in person, but you can at least build your safe circle and have that as your background. Or you can be just yourself and choose to be unapologetic and say what you need to, right? Start to own your truth.
It's harder than it seems. Because I remember that when I was also going through a difficult time, when I was in the startup, and it affected so many things in my life as well, is that you do feel like you can't open up to anyone, especially even the people that are closest to you, because of all those things that you mentioned. You might feel like they don't understand. So I just wanted to acknowledge that sometimes when you're in that moment, you feel like no one would understand you and you feel so alone.
Yep.
Right. What were some of the things that you were going through at that time? And you mentioned that you had gone to a therapist as well. So when you came to Singapore, did being part of a community help you, or you created your own?
I did. And I think it goes back to my days of being a chameleon in school.
Yeah.
You come to Singapore, and if you don't have any obviously Singapore is a very transient society, right? Lots of expats moving in and out. And also obviously Singaporeans here. No one's going to come up and say hi to you. You're just one of many moving in and out and being here, right? So it's your opportunity to make multiple friends.
Yeah.
Say hi, make the first move.
Yeah.
So you've got a group here, a group there. You're going to a run club here. You're going to a social networking event here. You got a community through work.
Yeah.
You got a community through, your other friends. And you embrace that. You start to, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And to me, and I've often said this, Singapore is one of the most networked countries in the world. You're doing yourself a disservice if you're not networking here.
True.
Because everybody is maybe 2 or 3 heads away from someone else.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the benefit of being here.
Yes.
And your network, I've always said this, your network is your net worth.
Yeah. I never really thought about it that way, because I think when you're not open enough to be more vulnerable, you actually can't let the other person see who you are.
Correct.
So actually, I think good networking is about being more vulnerable. I don't know about what you think about that, but to me, that's how I started to find my tribe and to connect with people like you. If you didn't see the content that I put out, how would you know what I represent?
It's being authentic, right? I mean, own your truth, whatever that is, right? And you're right. I think, and even that is a skill that you have to be comfortable with, right?
Yeah.
If you meet someone for the first time, you're not just going to expect the other person to open up, right? But you cannot build trust until both of you open up. You're still people, right? So now you have to make a choice. Do I go first? And hope that they will open up?
Yeah.
But then if they don't open up, then, you've put yourself in a position of vulnerability where you could be judged.
Yeah.
And that's something that you're going to have to be okay with.
Agree.
Right? So for me, I always go first. I mean, if they ask, here's my story.
Yeah.
Right? Here's what I'm going through. Here's some of the challenges I've gone through in the past, depending, of course, on the conversation and everything else. But it more likely then sets the person at ease because I'm coming from a position of I'm being real.
Yeah.
This is what you get. This is the real context, right? And then they often start to resonate and say, okay, hey, me too.
Yeah.
Or I also went through something similar.
Absolutely.
That's when you've made a breakthrough. Now the conversation can be much more intimate, right?
That has been my experience as well.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about leading with vulnerability because I truly believe that, after having gone through transformation in my own healing as well, that actually being vulnerable, not just for men, but for women who feel like they need to be strong as well, is actually so powerful because by being vulnerable, it allows others to do the same. What is your take on leading with vulnerability, especially for men?
So I'm a huge fan of it, but I think there's a time and place for it. Also understanding how vulnerability as a superpower can be used, right? Key example, if you're that one of those people that, if you're in your workplace and you're always sad or talking about things, right? It may feel to that person that you're obviously trying to connect with other people, but for other people, it may feel like, oh, this is too much.
Right.
Whereas connecting one-on-one or connecting in the context of conversation and then showing your vulnerability, then that actually allows you to build deeper relationships versus coming off as I'm a sad person all the time. Right. So that's a context. And I think what's interesting about men versus women, particularly in the workplace, right? It also depends on your industry. I can sit here and say financial services, which is huge in Singapore.
Yeah.
I'm like, is it good to be vulnerable when you're a trader at a bank? I don't know. You worked at the bank, so I don't know. I mean, do you want a male colleague who's responsible for a pretty big book of business to be vulnerable all the time? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. Versus some other industry where it may be okay or acceptable. So I think it largely depends on the individual.
Yeah.
I find, and this is my 2 cents, I find in sales, vulnerability is actually the hidden superpower that can get you where you need to go. Because it kicks off the trust factor faster. It builds credibility because now they feel they know you versus your product. 2 different things. I'm like, pushing product in a sale, again, is a movement in time, right? Building a relationship, they're investing in the person. I'm letting you in. And consequently, you letting me in. So now we have a great relationship. Now let's talk about your needs, the products, and the sales that will all happen, right? But that vulnerability needs to happen. And so that's a big thing for me. And I tend to use that quite often to really just get the other person at ease.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love what you said because a number of things came up for me. One, it depends on your role, right? And I think that is also why certain people fit certain roles. And it depends on the context that you're in terms of where you are in the workplace, the timing and that kind of thing. But I also wanted to make the distinction between the fact that vulnerability may not also always mean that you sort of pour out or express your sorrow or your sadness. But I think vulnerability for me as well is about empathy and about understanding the other person's situation and point of view so that you can then make a better connection, a deeper connection, whether you're the boss or the line manager or as a colleague. So I think that's pretty...
Yeah, and if you're lucky enough to work for someone who appreciates that right? I'm extremely empathetic when any of my direct reports that have worked for me in the past will come to me and just say, listen, today I'm just off and here's why.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going through a hard time. Here's why. Okay, understand. What do you need? Right? I've done it with my own bosses where I've had some really, really trying times and I had to let them know what was happening. And this is, hey, if you notice I'm a step behind, here's why.
Yeah.
Right? Only so that they understand that this is not the norm, right?
Yeah.
This is not the normal me.
Right.
Something's happening and you should know.
Yeah.
Right? So again, I wouldn't advocate this en masse. There's a time and place to everything. It depends on the relationship you have with your boss and whether or not, that would be a topic of conversation. But I've often led with that, especially when I've gone through trying times mentally, to say, if you want the best out of me, you need to understand the whole me.
Yeah. No, thank you for making that distinction. I think it's very important to know when the right time and place, depending on who you're, working with and how that might have different effects on different people.
Yep.
So that's very practical. What would you say to young leaders today who do feel probably, like it's needed to express some vulnerability? What would you say to them today in the workplace?
I don't really have a silver bullet on what it takes to be a great leader. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think if you're rising up in your profession, I would say empathy is key, right? Yeah. Be extremely aware, or at least try to be aware of people who work with you, people who work for you, and who you work for, right? So that human psychology piece that I keep coming back to is so critical, because every one of us is unconsciously selling, right? So be really aware, learn, right? Listening is a very underrated quality.
Yes.
I've been guilty of it.
Me too.
Yeah. I'm just like, I'm quick to go to some solutions, right? I'm like, but I have to remind myself to take the time to listen and just understand a point of view before I sort of voice my opinion. And that's a skill that comes over time, right? You get better at it as you go through your profession. And it's not just listening for the sake of listening. It's truly understanding their point of view. Whether or not you agree with it is a different story.
Yeah.
But there's two sides to every coin. Understand the other side, right?
Always, yeah.
And then you can start to figure out the right solution together. And I think that's what will foster collaboration. It will gain you respect in terms of your peers and within your company. And I think that's valuable.
And you know what I've realized is that to get to that place of empathy, of connection, and of vulnerability, you actually have to make mistakes and fail. Because if everything is going right, if everything is linear, you actually won't feel that you need to be like that.
Yeah, and look, I'll be the last person to say that there is a right or a wrong way, right?
No,
if you decide that your career journey is one level up, the next level up, and the next level up, and it's very linear for you, and that's what you're comfortable with, awesome, right? Go do it, right? You have to be true to yourself first.
Yes.
So the way I always put it is, or at least, I tell my mentees is, if you want an incremental journey, then you will always do things one way. If you want an exponential journey, you will introduce risk into your journey.
Yeah, it's your choice at the end of the day. Yeah, and everybody has a unique path. Time is running fast.
Really?
I'm gonna ask.
Should we go another hour?
I'm gonna ask you some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
And you can answer it, in any way you want. So, if there was one thing you could say to 10-year-old Neil who just moved to the US, what would you say to him?
It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right.
Okay. If there was one piece of advice you could give to someone for their career or in entrepreneurship, what would you say to them?
Be aware. Be aware of people around you, people you work with. Understand what motivates them. Use that to your advantage.
Okay. Good one. If there was one message you could give to men out there, what would you say to them? You're
not alone. And, it's people like me. If you need to connect with me, connect with others, but you are not alone.
Thank you. I think that's very reassuring. Just the Michael Jackson song just came to my mind. If you could have dinner with someone, dead or alive, who would that be and why?
Oh, interesting. That's a good one. George Clooney.
Oh.
Only because he's been accused of looking like me. So
really? You do have the vibe. Yeah. You do have the vibe.
Just fascinating career, and I'd love to have dinner with George Clooney. I think that it would be we had a lot to talk about.
Super cool. Super cool. And last question. Oh yes, I know you love music. If there was one song that would describe how you want to live your life, or that could cheer you up whenever you're down, what would that be?
Journey. Don't stop believing.
Okay. Yeah.
Always.
Pretty empowering.
Yeah, always. Anytime that comes on, it makes me happy.
Thank you so much, Neil. It was a very fast-paced, dynamic conversation, and we talked like everything from entrepreneurship to growing up to mental health and vulnerability. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.